And I will monitor the questions for you guys, okay?
Thank you, Barbara.
Perfect.
Steve, I am noticing it won't let me check the share sound checks box.
Well, let's, I've got your slide. So if we get to that point and there's a problem, I can probably jump in and do it.
Yeah, it's just the video. So that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, but let's see if it works. It may work just fine.
Okay.
Sophia, I was going to wear those very earrings.
Ugh,
So glad I didn't.
I think we would look good together though. Matching is a fun thing.
Actually, I think you're very color coordinated. I think that Doug could have your jacket.
Yeah.
Little fall theme.
Yeah, we should have just done a shopping trip beforehand. That's what we should have done.
Yeah. Off to City Center. Except on our salaries, we can't shop at City Center.
Oh, but we don't need everybody knowing that. Okay.
I thank everybody for doing the exercise program. I see some chatter in the box about Vivo, the Vivo program. As they said, we will be hosting a webinar on Vivo at the end of the month. So please jump in. We have a couple of our villages that are participating with Vivo right now. So it's a great opportunity to, continue movement, and Zoom. So without further ado, I want to introduce Doug Gaddis with Silver Spring Village and Sophia Ross with Capitol Hill Village. And they will be presenting on diversity LGBTQ. So take it away.
All righty. I'm getting our presentation up here. Okay. So Doug, I don't know if we'll be able to match the energy of Roberto, but I hope we can try our best.
We'll have a little exercise regime right in the middle.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. It's really exciting to have the opportunity to talk about such an important topic today. Doug and I have been working really hard on this, and I think that we're going to have some great conversations. I hope you can put up with us for a whole hour. But without further ado, we're going to get into things and start off by telling you a bit more about us. Doug, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Doug Gaddis, and I use the pronouns he, him, and his. And I am executive director of Silver Spring Village in suburban Maryland.
That's right. Everybody's coming from all over, so I have to be more specific. My name is Sophia Ross. I use she and they pronouns, and I work for Capitol Hill Village, which is one of the 13 villages located in Washington, D.C. Our village is specifically in the Capitol Hill area, and I'll be diving a lot more into the makeup of our village later on. But as Doug mentioned already, we decided we would introduce ourselves with pronouns. I know this is something that is becoming a lot more common for folks to be hearing. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that before we get into things. We also are going to be talking a bit about the LGBT acronym specifically and our choice of which acronym we used. But really the reasoning why we use pronouns in our introductions is because it's a sign of respect. Similar to when you use the terms Mr., Mrs., Miss, etc. when you're talking to someone. Also, more notably, is because folks don't always use pronouns that we assume they use. So he and she are generally the ones that come to mind. For instance, I also use they, them pronouns because I'm non-binary, and that's not necessarily something you would know just by looking at me. So, Doug, do you want to add anything onto that?
Sure, I would just echo that it really is about respecting the individuals. I think that, it's an obligation of any village staffer or volunteer to respect our members and to treat them in the way that they wish to be treated and to treat them with dignity. So making sure that you're using the right pronouns is a key part of that. And, I would just say it's not always evident what pronouns someone wants to use, and there is no problem asking someone. As long as you do it with genuine interest and kindness. I don't know of anyone who does not appreciate being asked their pronouns. And just to go a little bit further, all of us stumble over the plural conjugations with, the singular and the plural verbs. If you make a mistake, apologize and move on in your conversation. No one is going to hold that against you.
Yeah, and we did a great program a few months back all about pronouns. So I know we won't get a chance to talk a lot about that, but if you want another hour of content just on that, we can share that if you're interested. But yes, before we move on, we wanted to talk a bit about our choice of acronyms for today. So specifically, we're going to be using referring to the LGBT community as LGBT. You'll also see LGBT plus, LGBTQ, and a few other variations. We specifically chose to use LGBT for our acronym just because we thought it would be the most common term that folks that are joining today would hear. So we didn't want to freak anyone out with some new terms. We also wanted specifically to note that the Q part of the acronym and other parts of the acronym are a bit newer. And really that is because of the fact that our community acknowledges that we are continually growing. 10, 20 years ago, it wasn't as common to be talking about certain things like gender identity, and there wasn't as many words to refer to that. And so it's just the expansion of our acronym has been because we want to make sure that we are affirming everyone and acknowledging everyone in our community. So, and without further ado, we're going to do a very quick summary of what we'll be talking about and then dive on in. So we kind of have broken our workshop into 5 different sections for today. We'll be starting off with a great video to show you that has some stories of LGBT elders. Then we'll be diving into some advice about LGBT inclusion work for villages and what approach you might want to consider for your village. I will be talking in detail about our new LGBTQ inclusion best practices tool for villages, and then we will have time for some Q&A with you all. Okay, this is the moment of truth if our video will play. So first, a bit of context. The video that we are going to be showing you is from a project. It's called Not Another Second. It is both a video and exhibit project, so it does exist in real life. This was to document the experiences of different LGBT elders and also to raise awareness about the challenges that they may face as they age. So we had a few reasons for specifically choosing this video to show you all, but the main one is what it comes down to is that we wanted to show that LGBT elders could be any of our members, our current members or future members, even if you know it or not. And we wanted to talk a little bit about this big why piece, getting into why should you consider doing LGBT inclusion work and what does that impact look like? So that is what we were going for here. And now I'm going to try to play the video and we're going to see if we get sound. Doug, do you have anything to add before we move on?
I would just jump in and say, while you're watching this, be thinking about the similarities and differences between the folks that you'll see in the video and some of the people that may be in your village. And specifically the heterosexual cisgender people that may be in your village.
Okay. Doug, can I get a thumbs up if you got sound? No sound?
I do
No,
not.
we've got sound now.
Okay, I'm gonna try to make it bigger.
I came out at about the age of, until I was about 60.
I was 40 years old when I came out.
I actually knew that I was a lesbian from the age of 5, but at the age of 16, I decided no more girl clothes. So I guess you can say I really came out at 16.
At least 25 years ago, when I realized that I was gay and could come out. And I still had that stigma that it was wrong.
16 or 15 years old, I kind of realized that there was something different about me.
I feel like I was hiding my true self before I came out. One night with a gorgeous fellow changed my life forever.
I didn't publicly announce I'm gay until I ran for Congress in 1996. And then everybody knew. It made the news everywhere, even the New York Times.
I was never in the closet, so I never had to come out. You knew, I knew, whoever knew, knew. I faced more problems being a Black woman than I did as a lesbian.
Once I came out, there was no going back. And especially being lesbian and Black and in a church, you know, it was difficult, but I stood my ground and I refused to let people intimidate me.
I came out twice. I came out as a gay man, and then I came out as Pearl.
Our generation is not something that came out like kids do today.
We did not use the word queer at the time or gay. I was uncertain about what was going on, but I knew that I had this attraction to the same sex.
I had 2 older brothers I love very much now. Back then I had a hard time with them. And they used words like queer and sissy and things like that.
In those days, I was called a tomboy because, you know, I always played with the boys. You know, it's like my crew.
In the town of Raleigh, we really didn't have a lot of gay people. And when I was coming out, it was, you know, very secretive. You could just have to sneak in the doors of a bar. I think the gay bar was 1 block from my grandmother's house, so I could walk and get to the bar and not get caught. You still hide it, especially from family, because you're afraid you're going to be totally rejected. And that's a very painful thought.
If you were younger in our generation and you came out to your family, usually it was disastrous.
My mother used to say, if one of my children become a dyke, a bull dyke is what they called them back in that day, I'll kill them. She took me to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was like, well, what do you think is wrong? And she said, well, she's just not normal. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, okay, I am normal.
In the 50s, coming out was not even an option necessarily, you know. It was still a crime to be a homosexual, obviously.
We had the determination that homosexuality was a disease, the lavender scare, which kept a lot of people from working, the raids that went on, just because someone would decide, okay, it's time to go raid this place.
So there was a part of me that wanted to be a traditional gal. I thought that was my right path. I remember early on thinking I would never go into a gay bar.
Was most painful was how I reacted to other homosexuals, other people, non-heterosexuals. I was very mean, because if I joined the other side of the team, then I'm safe.
I went into the Navy with the idea as a career man. And here I was, a gay man, 19 years old. And my job was to give people who were gay discharges, undesirable discharges, because they weren't fit for service.
I had a friend that committed suicide because he was gay, and he felt back when we were growing up, you had to be married, or you were gay, if that title was put to you. I thought if I got married and had a baby, I would be okay. Then I wouldn't have to tell my mother that I like girls. I wouldn't have to tell anyone that I like girls. I would be the norm.
At that point, my mother was, of course, mortified. And she just decided that the best thing to do to cure, so-called cure, was to get married. So I got married at 14 years of age.
I met my partner, Michael, in 1968.
Earl came into the house, and I looked at him. He had on a white dress shirt. It's summertime, in brown khaki pants. And
There we go. Okay, we're only able to show half of the video, but you can view it online, and they also have the individual videos for each person's story if you're interested. And I gotta figure out how to move the slides again. Come on.
And those individual stories actually make for really good conversation starters. You can have, within your village, you can have people watch it and get together for a conversation. And it's a really great way to begin the dialogue.
Yeah, and they're not long, which is also very helpful. But now Doug and I want to talk a little bit more about this, considering an approach for your village that is more humanized when it comes to LGBT inclusion work, as well as just kind of talk about how DEI work is usually approached. So the first point we have up here, that one I specifically wanted to talk about just because of the experiences I've had a lot over the past few years in doing this work. And that is that sometimes when I start talking to different villages and other folks about doing LGBT work, they immediately think, oh, does that mean you're trying to make your village exclusive? You're trying to be an LGBT village? And that's not true. Although there could be the opportunity for that, and that could be great. Especially what we're going to be talking about throughout our workshop is this idea of making your village inclusive. And specifically that refers to making sure that your village is a safe space and affirming space for anyone who wants to be a member. And as we'll be talking about this, for this instance, it refers to LGBT members. And that is really the main point about that. Doug, do you have anything to add on?
I think I would just add that, for much of LGBT history in the United States, we have self-segregated ourselves. We had our own neighborhoods, we had our own bars and other places that people would meet. So particularly for older adults, being in a truly inclusive environment may be something of a new experience. And I think it's worth keeping that in mind.
Yeah, that is really important to consider. And we could talk a lot about this, but I think that it can also lead a lot of folks into hesitancy when it comes to accessing aging services, especially because a lot of aging services and communities aren't necessarily prepared to serve LGBT folks, or aren't, providing the messaging and outreach and other kinds of things they could be doing to the community. So that can create a lot more fear. And if you have past experiences that have been really negative, it's very valid to see where that fear comes from. But moving on to our second point here, I know that a lot of us have been doing DEI work or have done DEI work in the past, and a lot of times it can be very like cut and dry, very like checking off some boxes, I like to say. And when we were talking about the guide and just in general, what comes to mind is this idea of looking past that and really considering the people that you are going to be impacting when you do this kind of work.
I think in a situation that I had at Silver Spring, not long after I began here, and I had wanted to make sure that we were inclusive of all sorts of people. And we had a lesbian couple who joined, and ill-advisedly, I jumped right on that and contacted them right away and said, hey, why don't you help me get an LGBT group started at the village? And their hair stood on end. It was uncomfortable. And that was an error on my part for failing to see the humanity and what they themselves might want versus being representative of the group.
Yeah, that's a really important experience to point out, Doug. I think that it's true. I think about this a lot, that not every member wants to get involved in what I'm doing. And I want to respect that and make sure that they can just be part of the village. They don't even have to tell anyone what their identity is. And that's how it should be, because that's their choice. Yeah, I feel like the third point kind of speaks for itself. We're all very aware that what we do and the work that we're doing is very community and person centered already. So it kind of just makes sense to consider taking more of a humanized approach. And it fits very naturally in the way we do things. Yeah. And that, also to further emphasize, if we haven't already, you're more likely to get way more positive results if you go towards a more humanized approach, just because people are going to be more interested. It is just more meaningful. It is going to just, it's gonna be better for everyone. I think it'll be easier to have conversations. And especially going back to Doug's point, I think that some of the things that also have come up for us is this, how do you handle this idea of tokenism? Seeing people as who they are, versus being part of your objectives that you're trying to do to get your DEI work done. So do you have anything to add to that, Doug?
Well, I think any of us, our gender identity and our sexual orientation and our sex lives are a very, very important part of who we are as humans, but that's not all that we are. And so it's always really important when you're working with your members, with volunteers, to keep that in mind, that there is much more to that entire person than merely their gender or sexual identity.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we're gonna have some fun. We have some polls and discussion questions for you all that we wanted to throw out to you. So for our first poll, which will be coming up on the screen in a moment, we wanted to hear from you. Does your village have a DEI plan which has a focus on the LGBT community, or does your village already have a specific LGBT inclusion plan?
Ooh, and I have dropped the ball here, Sophie. So
That
if
is
you can give me, is it possible to, while I'm loading that up, for you to to move forward to your discussion question? And then I will get that poll up.
Doug, what do you think?
I think that'd be okay. And I'm going to jump in. There was a comment that popped up requesting identification of what DEI means. So that's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you for that. I did not see that. And I shouldn't assume that everybody knows all the acronyms. Yeah.
And I just put it in the chat also. And I don't know if you want questions along the way, but if you want me to interject, there's a couple of questions here.
I think it would be better if we waited until the end, just based
Perfect.
on how we're.
Okay, I'm working on getting this poll question up. I apologize. I put it in the wrong place.
It's okay, Steve. No worries.
But I would not pause. I would keep the
Oh, yes.
conversation
Okay,
going.
we're gonna keep moving. So that is fine with us. So moving on to our discussion question first. We wanted to know, you can answer this in the chat. Is there anything about your village that signals that is inclusive and welcoming, or that signals that it is not inclusive or welcoming? We're really here just trying to dig deeper into understanding what this looks like for each village. And we'll give you a few minutes to answer that and think about what you want to say.
I was just going to ask the same thing. Somebody asked, can you give some examples of what it would look like?
Sure, that is no problem. Doug, do you want to start off? You want me to start off?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So a lot of the things you can do are frankly easy to put in place, and they don't seem like big things, but they actually are when you're the person that's being targeted. Images in your publications, in your brochures, in your newsletters. Do you have pictures of same-sex couples, or do you have imagery of rainbow flags or other symbols that someone would immediately recognize? Do you explicitly mention LGBT activities in your newsletters or in your reports to funders? Do you have events that focus on, they can be anything from health-related concerns for LGBT folks to historical conversation or conversations about historical things in the LGBT movement? You can do celebrations of Pride Month in June. You can do LGBT History Month in October. National Coming Out Day is in October, and believe it or not, all seniors who are LGBT may not have come out, so that could be an opportunity for them as well.
And to add on to that, some of the more like internal things that we've done, for instance, I run a monthly column in our newsletter. It's called the LGBTQ Corner. And each month we'll have different articles that are LGBT related. So that has to do with history. Sometimes we'll run some member profiles. We'll talk about different topics. We also have a insert that we just created for our member welcome packets that has a brief overview of the LGBT related programs we're doing. And other things. So if anyone gets that welcome packet, then there that is. You get to see that, and it's just kind of there as part of everything else.
Okay.
Steve, yeah, Steve.
I can do the first poll question, which is, does your village have a DEI plan which has focus on LGBT community or specific LGBT inclusion plan? So I'm gonna launch that.
Thank you. And for the sake of time, we're just going to do that first poll for now, since we just did the discussion, and then we'll move on after that. And folks can keep putting their responses in the chat.
Okay, and I usually like to get it to, how many people do we have here? All right, if we get close to 50%, that's usually pretty good. We're almost there. Okay.
And while we're waiting for this, other things you can do in your member or your volunteer applications, give people the option to tell you what pronouns they want to use. Give the option for people to tell what gender they are.
I can't tell from here.
If you have a place for someone, if you ask, are you married? Maybe you can rephrase that. Is there, do you share a home with someone? And maybe you give them the option to check off the term they would like to use for the person. Is it a partner? Is it a spouse? Is it a wife or a husband? So all of those kinds of things are a signal to folks who may not know your village well that this is a safe space.
Okay. Would you like me to share the results of the poll?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. There you go.
Alrighty, so we have about 5% of folks who said you already do have a DEI plan that either focuses on the LGBT community or you have a specific LGBT inclusion plan, which is great to see. It's also perfectly fine that we also saw a bunch of no's. That's kind of what Doug and I were expecting when we put this question out there, because from talking to other villages and specifically asking questions about LGBT related topics, it is apparent that a lot of villages haven't considered this. And that's okay, because that means there's a lot of opportunity to do some great work and to start thinking critically about why it's so important to do LGBT inclusion work and what that might look like. And we see 27% are working on it, which is awesome to see. That's great. Okay. Moving along, thank you everyone for providing those responses. And we'll definitely talk a bit more about our discussion question later. But Doug and I wanted to take the opportunity to talk specifically about what has it been like for our villages to start doing LGBT inclusion work, and kind of do a compare and contrast to what it looks like to have a big village and a middle-sized village, because we're all very aware that LGBT inclusion work is going to look differently for each of us, and that's all right. So, Doug, you want to start off?
Sure. I think some people in the audience may argue that 257 members is not a medium-sized village, but we're a big village and you're a bigger village, so we can live with that. But sure, so we have 257 members, and as I mentioned before, we're located in suburban Maryland, just outside DC. The area that we serve really is a mix of true suburbia, but also of the urban landscape of downtown Silver Spring. That said, there really is not a very visible LGBT population in our community, even in our county. Certainly we exist, but because we are a neighboring community of Washington, DC, really throughout the last 40 or 50 years, gay folks who move to DC tend to move to the city in DC, and that's where they age. So it's been a little bit of a struggle to figure out exactly how we represent our community and how we find LGBT members who may want to join. We do not have a specific person on staff who can do this work. It really stems from a personal commitment that I have, because this is what I want as I age. For transparency, I'm 57 years old, so I'm not quite a senior, but I'm well on my way. Sophia and I talked a little bit about organizational resistance, and I am so happy to say that I have experienced absolutely no resistance in starting this work at Silver Spring Village. My board has been 1,000% supportive. All of our members, in fact, when we started an LGBT social group in our village, we had an awful lot of cisgender people, straight people saying, hey, you know, can we come to this too? It sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm just really, really thrilled with the reception that we've had here in our little corner of suburbia.
And in our neck of the woods, so
Hi, Nicole, this is Steve from Blue Ridge Adaptive Snow Sports.
Steve, you might want to go on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, so over in our neck of the woods, we're located directly in Washington, D.C. Our village is made up of about 400 members currently. And I can tell you for a fact, since we started asking this question on our member surveys and applications, 5% or so of our membership currently identifies as LGBT. And I would say this is a bit of an assumption, but I'm going to assume that will be growing in the next few decades of members. As Doug was saying, we are very known for our historic relationship with the LGBT community. And I don't want to give everybody a history lesson, but you know, that really is because bigger cities for a long time were seen as safe spaces where you could go to find community and be yourself and build your life as you wanted to be. And DC was one of those cities. And so we do have a lot of folks that have come here and have been here for a very long time, or moved here specifically because they wanted to have that safety and community. So we do have very strong connections, and there's more of a likelihood we will have LGBT identifying members. Another important thing to note about the work we've been doing is that my position with the village, which I didn't actually introduce, my official title is Digital Media and Grant Program Strategist. We have a grant from the DC Department of Aging and Community Living, which funds my position, and it's focused specifically on LGBT individuals and the LGBT community. So part of my position, in addition to a few other things, is to specifically focus on that grant, which is fantastic and phenomenal. And it's also a very unique thing compared to a lot of villages. I don't think that's going to be very common, although I would love it to be. Another thing, I think it's very interesting to talk about organizational investment, and especially to see how it differs between each village. So we, right before I started, were very engaged in taking on anti-racism work as it relates to our village. And there had been some challenges in figuring out if we were going to be able to kind of balance being able to do both of those. We have still had some strong organizational investment, but I can note that it is a challenge when there's so much going on. Also, our village is a bit different compared to other villages because we are a very large sized village in terms of who has investment and relationships between our board, our staff, our membership, and volunteers, which I'll just kind of leave it at that, is that, you know, that can sometimes cause resistance. But everybody is again still on board. And the last and most important point that I wanted to make about the work that we've been doing is that it has been a little bit narrow. And to expand on that, really that we've kind of focused on the L, the G, and the B in the acronym. So we've been focusing more on sexual orientation, and that's been a big part of the conversation. But even more importantly is our gender diverse elders, which we've started to see more members who are identifying of different gender identities. And there is a strong need to make sure that we are prepared to support and affirm them as well, especially because for many folks, there's more likely to be more challenges that they face in dealing with just the aging world and other things in life in trying to be themselves. So that's just nailing that message home, is that it's very important to make sure we are representing and thinking about all folks in the LGBT community, not just that narrowed focus. Doug, is there anything you want to add on before we move on?
No, I think we're good. We can get into the heart of the matter with the wonderful tool that you have.
Okay, I think in the sake of time, it would probably be a good idea to skip the discussion question, although I love our discussion questions, because we only have so much time here today, and the lessons learned section is also great. But I think that because we want to talk about the best practices tool, we will focus on that. And anyone who wants to get the slides later will hopefully get the slides later. I hope I didn't misspeak by saying that, but if you're thinking, okay, well, my village is interested in this, or we've been talking a lot about this, but really I can't find anything that's, specifically made for my village. That's what the LGBTQ inclusion best practices tool was made for. So the background around this tool is that I came on a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago now. And at that time, there was a lot of talk among villages here in DC around, I want to figure out what I'm doing. What could we do more of? How do I even get started? There was a lot of need, but not really any direction or guidance for what villages could do when it came to LGBT inclusion. So we put together a committee that was the DC Villages Safe Spaces Committee, which is made up of all levels, so members, staff, volunteers, who were both part of the community and allies. And they helped produce this fantastic tool, which was made for villages specifically in mind, to help start the conversation around LGBT inclusion, as well as create a LGBT inclusion plan. And I also specifically want to note that this tool was made with all villages in mind, in the sense that there isn't a right or wrong way to go around doing LGBT inclusion work, but this is a way to say, okay, what is going to be here to guide me? What kind of best practices could I look to? As well as, how do I do it if I only have so much time, or I only have so much energy, we only have so much money? Well, this is something that can help you fit what you want to do to that. There's no requirement to meet certain goals. It's just a way to know what those goals could be and what those actions could be. So getting more into things, we have 6 different focus areas in this guide. We identified these 6 focus areas based on what appeared to be most important to villages. That includes materials, programs, outreach, member resources, feedback and discussion, and training. I have only enough time to really dive into the materials section, which we'll be doing in a minute, but we'll put a link to the full guide in the chat. So I wanted to quickly mention, before I forget, how we recommended you could go about using this tool. So again, this is a very flexible opportunity. If you only have so many people in your village, it might mean that only one person is doing this work, but the ideal situation was that we hope that folks could create like a team that would take on reviewing the guide and see to see what their village is currently doing like an assessment, or what your village could be doing. And then using the best practices that we've noted and the suggested recommendations to help create goals and then put together an inclusion plan. So that is the ideal situation for how to use the tool. So as I already noted, there's kind of 3 core components to each area, each of the 6 areas. So, and I'll show you a visual of all this in a moment. So the first key component is our set of associated best practices, which we have shaped into the form of questions to help assess what your village is or could be doing. Then we have the list of recommended actions related to that area, to help you figure out what could you be doing, how do you start doing things, or what could you be doing more of, and then a progress chart for tracking your village's goals for that area, if you have any at the time. So this is an example from our marketing section. And I promise once we get through this, then we will get into our questions. So the top here, you'll see is a bit of a blurb. And that blurb is a way to talk about the impact of what happens if you do take actions related to this specific area, and why it's so important to be doing these actions. And so each section has their own personalized blurb. Then we have below that these self-assessment questions. For this section, there was only 2 key questions, but as I said before, they're a way to, quickly be able to go through and say, what is my village doing? Or you can then use them to start the conversation with other folks in your organization about, hey, I was going through this section. I noticed we don't do this already. What could we be doing? So it's very much so a lot more open and discussion oriented. And then at the bottom, we have the recommendations portion, which is just a brief way to give some suggestions on what could your village be doing related to that area specifically. How should you get started? What are some good things to be doing? This is an example of our materials section goal chart or progress chart. I just wanted to give folks a chance to see, what does this actually look like when you put it on put it into a plan. Pardon me, and how does that play out? So for this section, we had 3 example goals, and it then is broken down into what would be involved to achieve that goal, and ideally, when would we like to accomplish that goal by? So again, this can look different for each village, especially, what goals there are, what is going to be involved. But it's good to have examples to see what actually could be involved in how this plays out. So. Alrighty, now we've gotten to the point where we want to do our Q&A. Barbara, I know you've been keeping track of the chat and such. How would we like to go? How would you like us to go about this?
Well, how about I read some of the questions off for you in the Q&A first. So the first one is, our villages are very welcoming and inclusive. We've done years of recruiting outreach with LGBT events with no effect. We were told that drop-in recruiting doesn't work as well as joining and becoming members of the groups. But we have a shortage of volunteers who will attend these meetings long-term and building relationships. Any suggestion on what to do instead? Well, in addition, the same gal said another issue, we don't ask people their sexual orientation when they are joined. So we don't have statistics to prove what we do have is LGBT members. We are rethinking that this future data collecting and for future grants. Any comments on that? So in other words, they've done years of recruiting and outreach, and it's sounds like it's stalled. And so
I think it's a question of really, you're not going to see, well, I shouldn't say you're not going to see fast results. You may not see fast results, and it may seem that you're not getting anywhere fast. But it's the kind of thing you really need. Organizations need to prove themselves to a cohort of people who have experienced really astonishing amounts of discrimination throughout the majority of their years. So it really just takes being present and continuing to put the message out there that you are a safe space and you're a welcome and affirming space.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, to emphasize, Doug's absolutely right. I like to kind of think of this as the tortoise and the hare sometimes. You know, you have to be a bit more like the tortoise and a little bit less like the hare. I also think, yeah, I love a good analogy. And I also think that what's really important to consider, there's two other things I want to add on. One would be that, you know, you're still, any action is good. Just trying to move the needle forward. You could be touching more people than you think. Especially, again, to hammer home, I haven't been able to dive into this, but really a lot of aging organizations just aren't doing anything. And that's not only really sad, but to think about, you know, what it's like for folks, you know, it's really difficult to try to continue to exist and not be recognized and affirmed. But the other thing is that, again, with the idea of using this guide, if you're having a really hard time trying to work on one area, well, here are a bunch of other areas you could consider working on. And those might be more impactful than continuing to try to do the outreach. So it's about what eggs do you want to put into what basket. I'll end that there.
No problem. I do want to mention, it was in the question that people in the audience are not able to see pronouns. You know, they can't do that in their, you know, namespace. This is a different type of format. Everybody doesn't see each other. You only see the panelists. So that's why you're not able to manipulate your name and your different things. So I just wanted to give the caveat on that. Okay. So we did have a couple of things in the chat that I want to run by you guys. Where was it? So when you're mentioning organizational investment, is this more financial or of mindset?
I think it could be both. In our case, it certainly is one more of mindset. I can't think of any way that we have actually invested dollar resources in this, but it's a lot of time. It's a lot of passion and interest in it.
Okay.
I'm just going to second that, Doug, that for our specific instance, it has been because we've been able to have our grant funding. I think that another thing is, you know, again, focused outreach. So for instance, one of the first things that came to mind was the fact that every year we have a gigantic Pride celebration, and a lot of other areas have a big Pride celebration, but that's really expensive sometimes to get a table at. So that might be an area where it's like you do need a little bit of funding. I know Doug and I could probably dive into this question specifically for a long time, but when you're thinking about organizational investment, I think another thing that comes to mind thinking about the other DC villages we've worked with and the challenges that they've experienced. There's also sometimes when we're also talking about exclusive versus inclusive, some people had been like, oh yeah, we should do specific programs, blah, blah, blah. But then when they talk to the members, it's like the members don't want that. The members didn't want that. And so part of the investment when we're talking about organizational investment is knowing who you're doing this for. I know I've said this before, but if you're not actually meeting the needs of what folks want, it's not going to work out, and you're going to be putting a lot of time and energy into something that doesn't go anywhere. So.
Marty, I think it's Marty Lamb who mentioned Nancy Ruffner in North Carolina has a business called Navigator. She said you might be interested in Googling it. I don't know if she can expand in the chat what that is all about, but that sounds very interesting. Also, several people have asked you to post the guide, and some of the materials, either in this or, we will make it available after the conference too. And also, Seal Garrett said that she got me that I like the analogy you did, but she said a thoughtful, more intentional approach seems to be more powerful than throwing a rainbow on a picture. A young coworker in their office has schooled her on the term rainbow capitalism, which we want to action to support our images. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that we could talk a lot about this again, this idea of what tokenism is, and then the idea of intentionality versus trying to just meet a goal. There's a lot of different distinctions. So one thing of intentionality that might not come to mind for folks is we've identified that one of our big commitments is to make sure that our resources that we provide folks are inclusive and affirming. So that's going to be a process that involves a lot of work and time and energy. But this is so if you're someone who's LGBT and you want to get a resource from us, like for instance, a home care agency, then you won't have to out yourself, if you don't want to. And so that'll be a very meaningful action that we're going to be doing. But it's not just like, we threw a logo on our website and that's it. We're going to take the time to do what we need to do. Doug, you got anything to add?
I second that. It's really important that when we're supporting our members, we're supporting the entire member and doing it in a way that's appropriate to them.
Right. One last quick question. It just came in. How would you address conflicting diversity goals if membership is split on the need to how to address low-income communities versus LGBTQ communities? That's a tough one.
I'm not qualified to answer that one because that's probably more of like up my ED's alley. Doug?
Yeah, I would say I'm not entirely qualified to answer that either, but statistics do show that LGBT elders typically have lower income and are more likely to be in poverty than others. So there really may be more commonality there than you realize.
Right.
Barbara, do I have a second to give a plug for our new work group?
Yeah, you have a second. Of course.
Okay. Also, I love to see that Judy's mentioning we did actually start a program on series on grandparents of LGBT loved ones or grandchildren, which has been fantastic. But yes, I want to give a plug to our work group, which just started, and we are looking to continue the conversation that we started today. We have been doing kind of like monthly meetings, educational programs and stuff like that, but I think it would be great to give folks a chance to explore more and learn more from other villages. That's what motivated the creation of our work group. And I know that Barbara, myself, or Doug are all folks you can contact if you're interested in participating. And we would love to dive more into the questions folks have, really work on, together as a resource for each other, figure out, how can we all be more inclusive and affirming.
Thank you. And just to tail end on the previous question, Judy chiped in, and I actually agree with her. It's not either or. You have to make a way for both low income and LGBTQ within our villages, and to figure out a balance of how to get that message out. So, but thank you both so much. Materials will be on, and we'll share the polls and good materials. Thank you both so much.
And feel free to reach out to either one of us if there's any way we can help.
Yeah, Doug, you can put your info in the chat. I forgot the one thing we didn't do was put our info on our presentation. So
not too late, not too late. Terrific. Thank you both so much. And now I am going to turn this program on to Jessica Fredrickson, who, if you'll go ahead and